Good evening. Claiming victory, President Obama today declared his signature health care program, widely known as Obamacare, is here to stay. Just hours after the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a key provision of the Affordable Care Act, the president, seen here celebrating the decision with his chief of staff, took to a Rose Garden podium to proclaim Obamacare has survived.
After nearly a century of talk, decades of trying, a year of bipartisan debate, we finally declared that in America, health care is not a privilege for a few, but a right for all.
The case centered on what is essentially the underpinning of the entire law, the government subsidies that make it cheaper for people to buy health insurance. The decision directly affects over 6 million Americans. We're going to walk you through this ruling, who it affects, and the political reaction, and there is lots of that. Let's start with our justice correspondent, Pete Williams. Pete, good evening.
Lester, good evening to you. This is the second time the U.S. Supreme Court has bailed out Obamacare, this time even more decisively than it did 3 years ago. And once again, the decision is written by the court's conservative Chief Justice, John Roberts. Outside the court, big cheers for the ruling. Victory for the Affordable Care Act, ACA. The issue, who's entitled to federal subsidies that make health insurance cheaper? Conservative opponents said the subsidies were not for everyone, only for people who bought their insurance in one of the 16 states that set up their own insurance marketplaces. The opponent said the millions of other Americans who bought insurance on the federal marketplace, healthcare.gov, could not get the subsidies. But by a vote of 6-3, the Supreme Court said that's wrong. A decision by Chief Justice John Roberts, joined by another conservative, Anthony Kennedy, and the court's 4 liberals. The court said the 3 parts of the law are interlocking. Insurance companies can't deny coverage for pre-existing conditions. Everyone must get insurance to spread the risk, and subsidies make it more affordable. Take away the subsidies, the court said, and the system collapses.
Everything looks great.
Congress passed the Affordable Care Act to improve health insurance markets, not to destroy them, Roberts wrote.
Today's decision has monumental significance. It means that the Affordable Care Act is not just the law of the land, it will remain the law of the land.
But in a blistering dissent for himself and Justices Alito and Thomas, Antonin Scalia said the decision shows that the court favors some laws over others. Noting that the court has now saved Obamacare twice, this time and 3 years ago, Scalia used the Supreme Court's abbreviation and said we really should start calling the law SCOTUS care. Though the dissent doesn't mention Chief Justice Roberts personally, it was a barbed attack on his ruling.
The Supreme Court has twisted and somersaulted on traditional rules of statutory interpretation.
There's nothing in today's ruling to suggest that Obamacare is on thin ice legally or that the court is eager to hear more challenges to it. No big ones are pending anyway.
The Supreme Court has said that it is a constitutional law and has told us what it means and that the administration has interpreted it correctly. There's nothing left to fight about on a big scale.
Today's ruling leaves the health care law intact, so the subsidies remain in effect for the roughly 6 million Americans who depend on them to be able to afford health insurance. Lester?
Pete, you mentioned 3 years ago the Supreme Court had a crack at Obamacare. What's the difference between the 2 cases?
Well, that time, the decision last time was very splintered, justices going off in different directions. This time you don't see any of that, and the majority seems to accept the basic premise of Obamacare. And one other thing, last time Anthony Kennedy was one of those vigorous dissenters. This time he was in the majority, Lester.
All right.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.